And Dr. Lewis here. So this is just a quick lecture to go over visual rhetoric as well as connect it more overtly to the assignment we will be doing in class, which is over advertisements and commercials. So some of this will be a supplement to our reading for this module as well. So a couple of things that I wanted to go over is a basic media literacy skill is this idea of deconstruction. And deconstruction is the careful and close analysis of a piece of media. So looking at all the individual elements that make up a piece of media, the characters, the plot, the language, to understand its deeper meaning. So everything that you can think of as being part of media is trying to sell you something, whether that's a magazine ad, a sitcom, a conversation, a trailer, a TV commercial, whether it's an obvious product or whether it's a product like a TV show or whatever the product tends to be. They're trying to create elements that make you connect to the visual media in order for you to do something. So thinking about all these individual elements, also think about each image or piece of visual media having an argument. So they're all trying to convince or persuade you to do, feel, or buy something. And an effective image strikes a chord in the needs and desires of the receiving audience or consumer. So there's a connection that happens between an effective visual media piece, whether, again, that's an ad or a commercial or a trailer for a movie. So it strikes a chord between the audience and the consumer and what they're trying to make you do, feel, or buy. And this connection can be intuitive, but it's also highly calculated. So there are entire teams of people that sit around and come up with each commercial to try to make it effective to connect to the audience. So you can analyze the following elements as a start to start deconstructing images. So the first thing that you do is just observe everything that you can see. So there is a focus on the visual, so this includes angles, colors, people or other objects, lighting choices, composition choices, typography, script, or anything written on it. So all of these elements are part of the visual grammar that create the meaning or the message. So think about, why are they wearing a certain color shirt over another one? Why is the lighting there and not there? Why are these words chosen to be on this image? And that may sound very picky, but again, entire teams sit around and think about all of these choices and how they will be the most effective, why one color might be more effective than another color. So for a commercial, film, or other moving text of sorts, you can also analyze music, movement, and dialogue as part of what helps influence the meaning of the visual text. So ask these questions when you're analyzing an advertisement. Who is the target audience? And this can be very, very specific. Or it usually is very specific. So usually products aren't for literally everyone. Like diapers have a very important audience, but it's also a very specific one. That some of you might be very interested in diapers, and some of you might have never thought about it or cared about them. So it just depends. So it's a specific, clear audience for, baby diapers. So once you kind of have that target audience in mind, think about why or how you know who that target audience is. So what leads you to the conclusion of there is a specific audience. Then think about the literal meaning of the text. So this can be something as literal as buy diapers. This diaper is cheaper than this diaper, or this diaper is more effective than this diaper. So there's usually a very kind of literal meaning. You also want to think about the subtext, though, which is the unstated or underlying meaning. And this is very important when thinking about ads and commercials specifically, because sometimes it will be something like, you are a better mom if you use this diaper. or you're a better dad if you use this diaper over this other one. So those are kind of like the sneaky messages that they get in there to try to make the message more urgent or more effective. And speaking of effective, the last question you should always ask is it effective and why or why not? So do all the elements together work or do they not, and for what reason? So a couple of more specifics just to think about as you're going through analyzing a commercial or ad or visual media. So if there are figures, men, women, children, animals, what are they like? What can be said about their facial expressions, poses, hairstyle, age, gender, hair color, ethnicity, education, occupation, and relationships? So what about the people or the figures or the animals? I saw one recently where it was like paper towels, but the paper towel roll was talking. So if it's personified objects. So what about it? Why were those choices made? Why do you have one person over another one? Or why do you have an animal? Or why do you have children? What are the choices around the people that have been made? The theme. So what themes do we find in an advertisement? And this can be a little bit tricky too, because sometimes it can be the subtext. So you may have a plot in an advertisement that involve a man and a woman sharing a drink at night, but the theme might be jealousy, faithlessness, ambition, passion, etc. So the theme is kind of like the underlying emotions that they're trying to trigger in an audience. And then finally, language. What about the language used? Does it provide information? Does it try to generate some kind of emotional response? Does it do both? Does it use humor, alliteration, definitions, comparisons, sexual innuendo? There's a vast amount of techniques that go into the rhetoric of a written message. And we will actually be doing more of that later in the semester. But for this one, just think about what are the words actually saying and why were those words chosen? And then finally, any other element. So remember that any element that you can observe can be part of the visual rhetoric of a piece. So again, going back to some of these elements like music, camera angles, color choices, layout choices, typography, anything that lends itself to the purpose and effectiveness of the advertisement. And then finally, this is also sometimes something that we don't think about. You should consider how and why cultural or societal context matters. So commercials are made typically for a very specific culture, and they incorporate things from that culture in the message, whether it's overt or whether it's just something that we don't even think about. So it's difficult to view an image or commercial without understanding the cultural context in which it exists. So what type of life or values are normalized? How does the advertisement play into or defy societal beliefs? You can even have messages that are damaging or use stereotypes in negative ways. So thinking about those cultural and societal themes and context that helps you think about the advertisement. So let's discuss a few examples. I feel like a lot of this is easier when you have that concrete example in front of you. So let's look at 2 advertisements for Palmolive. And these are good examples because I think that even if they didn't look old, like you can look at them and say, okay, these look a little bit, these are obviously not of our time, contemporary times. But you can tell a very clear difference in these 2 advertisements when just these 10 years have gone by, essentially. So looking at the first advertisement, you have like the pretty woman and she's wearing red and it's kind of falling off her shoulder. So there's kind of there's a certain type of emotion that they're trying to evoke with that choice of image. And then we have the tagline, Most men ask, is she pretty? Not, is she clever? Which, at the time, that was a very, very, very popular type of advertising slogan. You probably would not see that worded in that way today. So, I mean, there are a lot of good critiques of advertisements today that will claim that, or that prove that the message hasn't changed that much, but you won't get it stated that overtly. But so that is an ad from the 1930s and them trying to sell this product to women. And then we get to the 1940s, and immediately you see something has happened. So this would be a weird advertisement to have in certain time periods, but 1940s, you can guess what happened. A war broke out, more specifically, World War II. So then you have, now you have more of a military theme. And the words change. So it's not just about it's still about being beautiful, but instead of kind of this alluring figure of the woman in red with the shoulder, you have still a very beautiful woman who is on duty, though. So it's a little bit more functional as well. So give your skin ivory care, doctors advise. So the focus isn't you should just be pretty and alluring, it's you should be pretty and also we have some functionality. So thinking about the difference in decades between a non-wartime society versus a wartime society, and how to sell a similar or same product. So I hope that example helps show you what I mean by cultural context, because the time period as well as the historical and societal context help us view these ads in their time period and in their specific moment, and understand why these ads were created the way that they were. And then one last example. Remember our Brotherhood Clydesdale commercial? So we used that example in our first unit over personal narratives. You can re-watch this commercial if necessary, but thinking about analyzing this commercial even more closely than we did in the last unit where we focused mostly on pathos. So how can we think about this commercial differently now that we're thinking about all of the elements and the cultural context? So you can review that and kind of think about it from that different lens or that slightly more specific lens. One thing that I wanted to focus on that we didn't talk about a lot in our first view of the commercial is that it is a very all-American commercial. And that is for some specific reasons. Budweiser is a very, very old, a very old American beer company. They definitely try to promote that idea of being like an American beer, an all-American beer, and a lot of their commercials are toward that theme. And it's not like they have American flags waving everywhere necessarily in this commercial, but the focus is on more like you have this very kind of wholesome farm setting with like sun rising over the hills. And you have a very all-American man that is cast. You have him kind of being a farmhand and working with his hands and wearing a pair of jeans. So there's very much a very all-American kind of feel to this, like the cowboy, the ranch hand, waking up early in the morning to take care of his stock on his wholesome farm. So there's definitely, and that's probably maybe not something that immediately came to mind when you watched it because it feels very natural and intuitive. So that's a normal image for most of us. This idea of there's a farm and people take care of animals. That's something that you've seen before. But it is also a very calculated choice. It's one that they made specifically. So I am absolutely sure that before they cast this man, they sat down and had a conversation about finding someone that they thought would look all American, a certain type of image of a person that they're trying to bring out there. And I'm sure that when they were choosing their song choice as well, so a very kind of Americana song as well. So think about that. Review the Brotherhood Clydesdale commercial and think about how your increased knowledge of visual rhetoric helps you analyze it. And then, of course, if you're still a little bit lost, we will go over many examples, including a student example, and we'll also have some activities that'll help walk you through this process. And as always, let me know if you have any questions.